and challenges. And one of the, I would say, especially in the today type of world that we live in, one of the hugest impedances is what I call facts, not feelings. I'm a facts, not feelings person when it comes to effectuating business, running organizations in the workplace, when you're in organizations. And what I have found is that a lot of people lean more into their feelings as opposed to what the facts surrounding the communication process, the scenario, what you're discussing, aftermaths of situations. I have found that people send you emails saying, well, I feel this way, I feel that way. And I'm not disavowing or attempting to tell people that they don't have the right to feel how they do. Now, if you had caught me 20 years ago,
is there anything better than a trip getting ready? Nope. For a long journey where our podcast released a new app and searching for a fade feeling, new fixation. Giving this a subscribe is the same sensation. Started with the day ones, they gave us fuel to support the season. Could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here for a reason. Notification bells, text some friends, all to let you know. Check your Bluetooth, connect, talk your wisdom out.
Welcome in, everyone. This episode, Leading with Finesse, Dr. Khandicia Randolph on power, purpose, and transformative leadership. Season 2, episode 101. Dr. Randolph, how are you doing this afternoon?
I am well. It's Saturday, so I won't complain. It's not freezing outside, so.
Yeah, it's pretty hot here in Austin, Texas. We had a little bit of wind, but I didn't blow away, and I'll take the sun being out. I always say this time when it's lightening up like this, that seasonal affective disorder that some people may have, I know they're pretty happy right now. They're very happy them clocks sprung forward.
Yeah, it's, I used to think the whole sad thing was a joke, or I don't know, a cop out, if you will. But,
yeah.
It getting dark early is very, dark 30 does something to you.
Yes.
Like everybody wants to crawl in the bed at 5 p.m.
Yes. So there may be some people that may not be too aware. So allow me to give them a little bit of an introduction, please. Today, I'm joined by a powerhouse in leadership communication and organizational development, Dr. Khandicia Randolph. As a dynamic thought leader, educator, and executive coach, she has empowered leaders across industries with her expertise in authentic dialogue, cultural impact, and strategic leadership. From coaching executives to writing groundbreaking research on leadership and race, Dr. Randolph is here to share invaluable insights on what it truly means to lead, inspire, and create lasting impact. Dr. Randolph, I think I got them. They know what direction we're headed at a minimum.
They do. And I think the next time I have to give a presentation, slide number 2 is where I tell people about myself. I hate that slide. I'm just going to press record and let you do it.
Yes, I understand that. It's a great trait. I don't have it, but no, I get it. Let's talk about, you emphasize the power of authentic dialogue. What are some of the biggest obstacles to effective communication in leadership today?
How much time do we have?
I mean, it's a podcast. If we go too long, they can press pause. They can go in the house, do what they got to do, come back, get back in the car, keep on listening.
Yeah, so oddly enough, I just did a very mini training on communications for the undergrads who I advise in my sorority last week. And communications is actually one of the chapters in my book, The Black American Church Leadership Dispensation and Challenges. And one of the, I would say, especially in the today type of world that we live in, one of the hugest impedances is what I call facts, not feelings. I'm a facts, not feelings person when it comes to effectuating business, running organizations in the workplace, when you're in organizations. And what I have found is that a lot of people lean more into their feelings as opposed to what the facts surrounding the communication process, the scenario, what you're discussing, aftermaths of situations. I have found that people send you emails saying, well, I feel this way, I feel that way. And I'm not disavowing or attempting to tell people that they don't have the right to feel how they do. Now, if you had caught me 20 years ago, I would have told you, my 20-year younger self, and we won't tell you how old I am, but she would have told you, you don't have the right to feel that way, right? No. I understand now, after multiple degrees and a little life experience, 5-year-old me might have told you that, right? So that would make me 25. That you don't have the right to tell people how to feel. You can tell people if they took something the wrong way. That's different scenario, right?
Yeah.
If what I said, one of my key phrases, and I'm not in sense where, knowledge is not meant to be hoarded. So one of my key phrases or points of deflection, if you will, in order to de-escalate situations is, if what I said inflicted harm upon you, then I apologize, right? That's not invalidating how someone feels, but it's also not disavowing or reneging on what I said, because what I said is what I said, right?
Yes.
2 + 2 = 4. Again, I'm a facts, not feelings person. So the fact of the matter is, maybe what you did was wrong. Maybe how you acted was wrong. Maybe you were out of place, out of step. You acted inappropriately, right? Maybe I said it. The way I said it might have made you feel some kind of way. The words that I chose to use may have made you feel some kind of way, right? But I found that in this wonderful world of leadership or development, member-based organizations, and just humans overall, they lean more into their feelings than what the fact of the matter is. Now, you might say, okay, well, how does that affect communication, right? Well, research shows us that communication is 90% emotional and only 10% rational, which drives me crazy, because people do what? They shoot from the hip. When they respond to you, they respond 90% of the time out of pure emotion. And many people I have found, especially those in leadership roles, don't know how to regulate that emotion. Our emotional intelligence is lacking. Like, we just out here, right?
Yeah. Oh, how can leaders balance transparency with authority when managing teams? It's got to be a challenge.
Okay, so here's the thing about transparency. People love to use that word. I think it's a buzzword. Quite frankly, it gives the perception that if I use the word transparent, then you're telling me everything and you're being open and honest with me and I can trust you. I'm not saying that the word transparent is a faux pas word. It has its place, but I think it's like a lot of other words that, especially when you talk about, as you mentioned earlier, org development or in any type of organization. So let's be clear, when I use the word organization, the word organization for me applies to a myriad in any type of organization, a for-profit business, a nonprofit, a member-based business, a church, a synagogue, what have you. People in organizations, I feel a lot of the times use the word transparency in a genuine and maybe not so genuine sometimes approach to attempting to engender trust. So if I tell you I'm being transparent, hypothetically speaking, it means that you should trust me. Yes. Because I'm giving you all of the information that you need in order to do your job, in order to make an informed decision, to be a stakeholder, to feel empowered. So theoretically, I am empowering you or imbuing you with power. But in all actuality, a lot of people are not transparent. People fake the funk. people lie. I'm not a person who I don't mince a whole lot of words, right? People lie. People fake the funk. And I think that people do it under the auspice, I know that people do it under the auspice of transparency. I'm telling you, as your leader, I'm being, quote, transparent. But if you actually understand what the word transparent is, water is transparent.
Yeah.
What human is really walking around being clear as water every single day? What CEO, CFO, COO, VP, associate VP, director is really giving every person in that organization all of the information? Yeah. We're not. When you really think about it, your custodial engineer is a part of the organization. Your receptionist, your secretaries, and anybody who knows anything about the way organizations and companies operate, we don't tend to put a lot of stock or value in those people who are at the bottom of the totem pole.
Yep.
And so why, as a person who's at the top, especially not a person who's considering those people, am I really being transparent? Am I really telling them everything? Yeah. No. Let me be, so a better phrase would be, let me be as honest as possible. Let me be as forthright as possible. Let me share as much information as I can within this context, right? So even I'll use myself as an example. As I mentioned, I'm in a sorority. I'm going to go ahead and get it out the way. I am a proud life member of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated. That being said, I am. All right, there we go.
I got my brick right there. I don't know if you can see it.
Lord, young people. Yeah, it's behind your head. I got it. Okay. So I'm my chapter president, but in addition to being chapter president, I am also an international appointee of our international president and CEO, which requires that I had to sign an NDA. Why? Because I interact with our executive directors, our HQ staff. I interact with other directors on the international level. I interact with our president and CEO, our first vice president. And some of that information is sensitive. And some of it is not released. Some of it is released to me at a different speed than it's released to the average member, right? And so I have to be very cautious when I'm in chapter meetings or when I'm with my undergrads who I advise to make sure I kind of have to separate myself. I have to compartmentalize. I have to have, for lack of better words, dissociative identity for a few seconds, because I have to make sure that I'm not sharing any information that I'm not supposed to with them, because I signed this sheet of paper that said I would not do that.
Yep.
Right. And so, in those situations, what people should really be saying is, I'm sharing as much as I can. I am providing you with all the information that I'm allowed to at this point. I promise that at a future date, it'll all become clearer. I'll give you some more information as time elapses, but as for the here and now, this is what you need to know, right? That's actually more authentic communication, because then we're being honest, as opposed to saying, in the sense of, in the spirit of transparency, but there's always something, once you get in huge conglomerates, it's always something you're not telling.
Yeah.
You could think about the family dinner table. It could be 10 of y'all at the dinner table, and somebody says something and everybody gets quiet. And when you're the person who doesn't know why everybody's quiet, you don't know what they're not telling you, but you know that they're not telling you something.
Yes.
Or when you say something wrong that triggers something and everybody clams up, you're like, what do people say? What did I say? Right? Because their body language communicates that you just stepped on somebody's toes, you just hit the nail on the head, you asking a question we all want to ask, that relative brings somebody new to the table that you've never seen before. Everybody just keeps eating, like this new person isn't sitting at your table. And then all of a sudden that one relative, who's probably me sometimes, is like, so who's he or she? They just like, I've been here for X amount of years, never seen them before, right? So that word transparency, it's what I call a trending word. It's a buzzword. And I'm hypothesizing that 10, 20 years from now, it will be replaced by some other word.
Yep. What role does storytelling play in leadership and organizational development?
Did you read my book? You're hitting all the points, right? So research also shows us that narration has the highest retention probability. So in other words, when people talk in stories, when they give examples, like I just gave the example of being at the dinner table, when people use narration in their communication or to drive home a point, it's remembered. The statistics show that people remember what you say more and more frequently and more of what you remember. And the reason is because narration and narrative storytelling evokes emotion. And emotion is what? 90% of communication. And so if I can tap into, whether consciously or subconsciously, tap into some emotion that you connect with the point that I'm talking about or presenting about or even reading about, right? Think about a book that you've read. There are some books that suck you in because you see exactly what they're talking about. For me, it's Becoming. Although I'm still not done with it, it's sitting over there on the table. It was a very easy read for me, not just because it was a biography or a biography of a Black woman, but because Michelle Obama and I actually grew up in that same neighborhood. We went to the same high school. And so reading a lot of her story resonated quite familiarly with me. And so it's a very easy read because why it hit all of those emotional points for me. You know, not just as a Black woman, not just as an educated Black woman, but as a Black woman who's in the Southside of Chicago, the same neighborhood, went to the same high school. I remember parts of her story more easily than if I had read someone else's biography because it did not evoke that emotion.
Yeah. You've spoken to diverse audiences, from corporate executives to community organizers. How does your approach to leadership training differ across these groups? I'm sure you tailor it.
Yeah, and actually that's one of the key throngs, if you will, of effective communicating. You have to know your audience. If you do not know your audience, then you're not tailoring it properly. So for instance, if I'm talking to fifth graders about communication, my examples are going to be much more base level, more primary than if I'm talking to high schoolers. When I am talking to, and I have to remember sometimes, when I'm talking to my undergrads, I have to remember that they are new. They're not just new to the organization because they just got here less than a year ago, but by comparison, they're new to life. And my experiences, my vocabulary many times, the in-depth thought processes and analysis that I have, they don't always share those because what? They're undergrads, they're in college. And I told them this, I was like, don't take this the wrong way, but you guys are kids to me. I said, not because I don't think that you're responsible, not because you don't go to class or don't go to work or whatever the situation is. I said, but I've been where you've been and I've done that already. And so I'm always kind of thinking, several steps ahead of you. And so when I do presentations to them or when I'm talking to them, one thing that I'm very cognizant of is trying to give not just examples of relevant things, but when at all possible, integrating some of their language use. Not a lot, because God knows I don't understand it, and we laugh about it all the time. I'm like, I don't know why you kids want to eat everything. Why do you keep eating? Why did this whole eat phenomenon is annoying? Y'all got to eat everything. It's annoying. Like, how was the picture eating? Explain that to me, right? And so when at all possible, I use their language because obviously it connects with them. I try to, again, you give relevant examples to the particular group that you're talking to. When I'm talking to upper level management, you use numbers, figures, bottom line. You talk about key stakeholders, right? That's the language they speak. There was a client that I had who is president of a board of a nonprofit. Him, his wife, and his father, I believe, who is now deceased, started the organization. And when I started working with them, think the organization had been in existence, meaning they had founded it about 12 years prior, but they had not done much work on fortifying the organization, growing, expanding, and ensuring that sustainability component, which is where I came in. And I did some executive coaching for him. And what I found was that when I gave him, excuse me, I should have warned you about that at the beginning. I'm trying to get rid of something. When I gave him examples, what I realized with him was I was in my leadership OD expert mode, and I was using my industry terms: mission, vision, alignment, congruency, values. And he just wasn't connecting. And it wasn't for a lack of intellect. It was because I was the subject matter expert in those particular areas, and that wasn't his vein in life. And so in order to get him to understand where I was trying to go, I had to use language that was more familiar. He happens to be in a D9 fraternity. And so I used my experience of being in a D9 sorority, and I flipped it on him, and I used Greek speak, right? And when I did that, he got it. When I gave him parallelisms that directly reflected upon his membership in a Black Greek leisure organization, then it made the connections for him. When I told him that one of the reasons we had to work on the sustainability component was because I said, once you decide to no longer be the president and step aside, you want to make sure your organization moves on. I said, for instance, your undergraduate chapter that you became a member of. I said, if you don't continue to bring in new members and train and develop people, then once you graduate, it becomes defunct, right? And he was like, yeah, and that's actually what happened to my undergraduate chapter. I said, exactly. I said, so you don't want that to happen to your organization. Yeah. And so you really have to be intentional, not just about tailoring presentations and coaching and communications and even your writing to your audience. You have to make sure that there are points of connection. Because again, if you're not evoking emotion, if you're not giving relative examples, in some instances, if you're not walking them through the process, they just won't get it.
I see that. I feel like there's a lot of leaders that wouldn't look to use the language as you said you did. What are some common mistakes leaders make when trying to inspire and connect with their teams?
Oh, I want to pull out that book and read your do's and your don'ts. There's a section in my chapter on communications that has do's and don'ts for this various reasons. So one of the mistakes that people make, we'll pick on people like myself. I have a doctorate. My doctorate is in strategic leadership. So when I talk about leadership and OD, again, how much time do we have, right? I will stay and talk to you all day. But what I fail to realize sometimes, like when I use the word congruency, it's one of the words that I use a lot. Most people don't understand what congruency is when you're talking about leadership and work development. People who are math experts know what a congruent triangle is. But when you're talking about leadership and work development, they don't really understand what that means. And so one mistake, and I realized this actually when I was in high school, there was a teacher, his name was Dr. Williams. He had a PhD in microbiology. He could tell you all about microbiology, how the different ecosystems work with that, and how us and our carbon emissions in Chicago then are going to disrupt the, Canadian water flow, whatever. But if you got him outside of that, he was sometimes like a deer caught in headlights, because he was such an expert and so focused on being an expert in microbiology that interacting with a political science expert was outside the scope of his reality. That happens a lot. The more people become educated in a particular subject matter, the harder it is for them to do a couple of things a lot of times. One, explain that to the regular person. And then two, sometimes hold conversations outside the realm of what that subject is. Like, think about people who are really into politics. That's all they talk about. Everything becomes a political conversation.
Oh,
Like,
yeah,
do
they'll
you
get it
want
in there.
chicken or fish for dinner? And then it
Yep.
that turns into a political conversation. Or
Yes.
People who are like extreme feminists. You say, so if you and I were gonna go out to dinner, I said, okay, hey Fred, how about you say, I got it, I'm gonna drive today, Soror. What, I can't drive because you're the man, you were just, maybe I drove the last time. Maybe you know that my tank is sitting on E and we don't get paid until next week, and I have to figure out how I'm getting to work or getting wherever I need to go.
Yes.
Maybe you notice visibly that I'm tired. And so you feel like, okay, I'm going to be a gentleman and pick up the slack and I'll drive. You don't, right? But people who have certain mindsets, and I've been in situations with people like that who are extreme feminists, it's like everything is an attack on their femininity. Why? I can't drive. I don't drive as well as you do. You're the one who has 3 speeding tickets in the last 5 years. I don't have any. You just got a moving violation last week. I don't like. You were just offering to drive, right? And that's where you go back to that, that emotional intelligence of understanding how to not just regurgitate the expertise that you have in a particular field, but how to do it in a digestible manner. So the way that I just phrased it, I often find myself phrasing it in those big words and sometimes overly educated words. And then I have to repeat it and break it down. Because when you say it the way that I just said it, it's not that it's not understandable. It's that it's convoluted.
Yeah.
And then I use words like convoluted instead of just saying confusing, right? Or
just
twist it up. Exactly. Yeah. And so you have to really tailor. It's not just about words. It's about sentiments. It's about relative examples. And it's about being engaging. You could have a person who is communicating the right information with the right level of vocabulary, the right level of in-depthness, or just not a depth of information, but kind of a breadth of information of hitting high-level overviews on different subjects. But if they're not engaging, no one's paying attention.
Your research explores the mitigating effects of race and culture on leadership. Can you share some key insights on how organizations can foster more inclusive leadership?
Yeah, first of all, have some more of us at the table. So, and I respect the right not to be political, and so I'll say this without putting a political spin on it. The sheer numbers tell us that the number of CEOs who are, for instance, Black in America, it was 5. I think we've gone down to Fortune 500 companies. 5 women of Fortune 500 companies. Okay. The number of just Black people, period, or brown people, is indigenous people, people who are not there due to a nepotistic system, right? So if you're people who have disabilities, both noticeable disabilities and those that are not noticeable, those that might be physical and those that are cognitive, right? How many times do you see someone who's executive VP that's in a wheelchair? And not in a wheelchair because maybe they have a broken leg, but in a wheelchair because they have muscular dystrophy or because they're paralyzed or who may have a speech impediment. Or who is blind. And I get it. Obviously, there are challenges with understanding inclusivity, but that's part of why my particular research focus and why I look at the mitigating effects of culture and races, because most of the leadership research is written by Western white males. And after that, your highest volume is Western white females. And so when we talk about things that are necessary and inherent to effective and extraordinary and exemplary leadership, you talk about things such as cultural competencies. In order for you to communicate effectively, you have to be culturally competent.
Yes.
Well, if you don't have cultural competencies or abilities, then that means you're not really as effective of a leader as you might be. If you're not being inclusive, and if you don't have a varied demographic and population that you're circling yourself with, then you don't have those abilities. And so when you send out a letter to your 20,000 employees and you say something like, Happy Juneteenth. Today we celebrate, when Black people weren't slaves anymore. Well, it's not really what Juneteenth is. I mean, that's a very shallow understanding of what Juneteenth is. And it doesn't take into consideration the forced enslavement after the Emancipation Proclamation. Yes. It also doesn't take into consideration that the Emancipation Proclamation was never really meant to free those who were enslaved. It was just a war tactic. But that's, that's neither here or there. And that's my political science degree speaking. But when you don't have a true inception of diversity and understanding that diversity is not just based on the number of Blacks, Latinos, Asians, Indigenous, people with disabilities, cognitive issues at the table. It's having a diverse populations of those groups of people. I'm not, me being Black is great, but I'm not, my perspective in life, my experiences in life, my learned experiences are not the same person who is Black and whose mother died when they were in 5th grade and had to be raised by a family member maybe they didn't even know. That's not my story. I'm also not a privileged Black person. So if you have a privileged Black person at the table, you need a Black person at the table who's gone through some struggle or who's been through a little something, because that affluent person's perspective is going to be less aligned with the major identity of most Black Americans. Yes. That being said, what the struggle looks like or what being an inner city kid from Chicago looks like is going to differ than what a Southern Black child who grew up in a population of 20 or 30,000 people looks like. The resources that I had available to me were massive compared to some other people. I remember my second year, I believe it was the second year of my doctorate, or my doctoral program, we were in our second residency, and everybody had to go around and do a mini biography or something. I don't know. Anywho, multiple people got before me all stated that essentially they were counted out, that it was counterintuitive that they were there. They almost did not graduate high school. They struggled through undergrad and they struggled academically all their lives. And so the fact that they were in a doctorate program was a miracle. They grew up struggling academically, didn't have the best academic resources. And when they got to me, I was like, listen, I appreciate everything that you all have been through. And some of these people, let's be clear, we're white. I said, I appreciate everything that you've been through and the struggle. I said, but y'all's story is not my story. I said, I went to Catholic school growing up. I said, I went to Whitney Young, I went to the same high school as Michelle Obama. I said, it's the number 2 school in the state of Illinois. I said, it ranks top 50 of public schools in the United States. I said, if I had failed, it was my fault alone. I said, my parents did everything that they could, especially my mother, to ensure that I had a quality education, that I had a sound upbringing. I said, so if I were not at this seat at this point in my life, it would either be because I chose not to or because I screwed up. I said, my future was mine and mine alone to mess up. I said, I was never set up to fail, ever. I said, so while I appreciate you all's vantage point, I want you to understand that that's not my story. That's not my testimony.
The Black American Church has played a vital role in leadership and community development. What inspired you to write the Black American Church Leadership, Dispensation, and Challenges?
I wanted to graduate. Like let's be baseline real, okay?
Sure.
I didn't write it because I was bored. I didn't, wake up one day and say, aha, I know my piece de resistance that the Lord has for me to do. This is my purpose. And I was trying to graduate. Very, very honest about that point. That being said, we'll get past the shallow part of it. But I actually did some research in my first year of my doctoral degree. And I examined the executive leadership of a subgroup of a larger international organization. Yeah. And what I came to realize when I was analyzing their data was that the behaviors that I saw in that particular group mimicked behaviors that I saw in the church. And yeah. And so I was like, oh, this is interesting. And so then me being me, I asked myself, I said, well, did this group of people, who again is a subset of a larger multinational organization, so did that group of people influence the church to show these behavioral, incept and adopt these behavioral challenges? Or did the church push them out to the rest of us? Right. Yeah. And so then after I asked my question, I said, well, by sheer chronology, it had to have been the church, because the first Black church in America was the AME Church, which was founded in the 1700s. So that is the base premises of where it all came from. And once I did, because I was participating in a research conference. So after doing the research conference, doing the presentation, presenting the research, that's when I knew what I wanted to do for my final manuscripts. And as I researched it and as I wrote it, it was my intent then to ensure that it became a published piece of work, because I believed that the world needed to see it. And that it wasn't, because if you read the book, it's not a church book, right? We're not, the book is not a feel-good church book. It is very much a leadership book. I had to use the ethnographic and anthropological route in order to get where I wanted to get to academically, because I couldn't just jump in and start talking about challenges that might be facing us. Well, actually, I did want to do that, but my chair told me no. I was like, oh, you don't think that's a good idea? I should, I don't like fluff. I like to get straight to the point. That being said, it was always my intention as I wrote it was to publish it and to ensure that it went to book format. My hope is that then, and it remains, is that it will catch hold in classrooms, especially college campuses. It will catch hold in actual churches and other faith, in especially cultural-based organizations, because a lot of nonprofits and cultural-based organizations face similar challenges that are highlighted in the book. And again, it doesn't look at the church from the cultural institution that it is. It looks at a cultural institution from a leadership and work development capacity. And I actually put in there, it's more so a performance review. Like, what are you doing right? What are we doing wrong? How do we change it? How do we ensure that 50 years from now, individual branches of the church, those places we actually go on Sundays and Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and the Black church at large continues not just to exist, but thrive, and that its place in Black history, American history, and in our global history remains perpetuously. That is how you say that word, is perpetuously, right? So that's the reason for it. But it's very much, and if you actually go to the end of the book, and spoiler alert, you can read the last chapter without reading the rest of it and then go back and read the rest of it. The last chapter is more so an academic revelatory love letter to the Black church, to my intellectual self. And that's where I have the epiphany. And I actually wrote the last chapter before I wrote chapters 3 through 11. I wrote it. It was the third chapter I wrote. The Lord gave it to me one day as I was listening to a Donald Lawrence song, preparing for that day to write. And it hit me. So that was my epiphany, aha, whatever. And I actually finished writing it over Thanksgiving, finished writing that chapter at my parents' house. And in it, I confess that it is not a condemnation on the church, but it is because I am the church. I am the Black church. Everything that you see before you is relegated and tied to things that I learned as a member of a Black church, as an academic scholar. And so because of that, I felt a duty and a responsibility to not just point out the challenges or deficiencies or just tell us what we're doing wrong, but to make responsible recommendations to ensure the sustainability and the improvement, right? Because I do understand and I do realize the magnanimous influence factor that the church has, not just on us here, but globally, right? And so because of that, I felt as an academic and as a member of the Black church, I owed it to us to write this manuscript in order to help us be better individually and collectively.
I hear that there are cultural pillars mentioned throughout our time today. In what ways do cultural differences impact leadership styles? And how can organizations navigate these differences effectively?
Oh my gosh, that is so important. And when I hear you, like the first thing that jumps to my mind is when you look at how different we are as Westerners from it is Christians, even those of us who are Christians and those who may not be.
Yes.
From people who are Muslims and who practice Islam. In fact, I don't think most people understand like what Muslim means and what Islamic means. And the words are used interchangeably in our society, such that if you don't care enough to look it up, you don't really understand. And it's not, and there's actually not, it's not a separate, some people even try to say that, oh, if you're Muslim, you're not Islam. No, Muslims are people who follow the Islamic faith, just like Christians are people who follow the teachings of Christ, right? But because it's not our main religious thought paradigm, it's not explained well enough. And so I say all of that to say that as a person who's not just a leadership expert, but who loves to travel and immerse herself in other cultures, because ultimately that's the only way you really become culturally competent. Reading books, watching movies, documentaries probably help more than watching movies and TV. A well-written, actually transparent and authentic book gives you a lens into other people's lives, and that helps. But to go and to experience it, whether it's traveling to another country or whether it's going to, a section or a subset of a demographic population within a city. And I'm from Chicago, and so we have a part of town where people who are Jewish live, and then there's a part of town where people who are Greek. We have a little Italy. We have places where there's a high concentration of Mexicans and Puerto Ricans and Africans. And so going into those neighborhoods, right? If you think about Mexicans, Chipotle is Tex-Mex. It's not real Mexican food. You can't think that you're somehow an expert in Mexican cuisine by going to Taco Bell or Chipotle. Like, that's absolutely blasphemous, right?
Yeah, it is.
If you want to get to understand more nuances of Mexican cuisine, like, you got to go to the places inside the grocery stores. Like, at home, we have inside the Mexican grocery store. This moment we go to, not too far from my parents' house. They cook the food in there, right? If you go to some parts of Chicago, you can just drive up and down the streets, and there's people selling from carts homemade tamales, right? That's the authenticity of Mexican cuisine.
Yeah.
As opposed to, again, going to Chipotle or going to pancheros, which I don't even like. So again, that being said, that's really how you become more astute as a leader. It is by immersing yourself, but then you have to. So when you're to the other part of your question, when you're communicating, again, one population of people that immediately pops in my mind are Muslims. And while I understood by proxy the separation and the social gap and the wage gap and the equality and inequity between men and women in traditional Muslim societies, it was not until I went to Dubai and experienced being seen by some men as less than a human that I truly understood. Like, you're shaking your hair, bro. I'm here to tell you, when we got off the plane. So you get off the plane in Dubai, you walk through all of that. You go through customs, and when you're met at the airport, they have on their kafkins. We are going out, and in order to leave the airport, you have to scan your luggage again, which was odd to me because I'm like, well, I had to scan my luggage to get on the plane in Chicago. Yeah, they ran it through all of this. What do you think? I didn't get the luggage back after that, so I couldn't have planted a bomb or a firearm or anything.
Yep.
But you have to run your luggage through a scanner. You get it, and then there's, for lack of better words, a checkout desk. We walk up to the gentleman, and I was traveling with a friend of mine who's a male, and he says, passport in the name of the hotel you're staying in. So I hand him my passport. My passport's like right here. Here's my passport. He doesn't even look at me.
Oh.
And I said, oh. And I turned to Calvin. I said, you need to give him your passport. He was like, why? You just gave it to him. I said, I'm a woman. He won't acknowledge me. And so, he gave him his passport. And then he's like, well, what hotel are you staying in? And Calvin was like, I don't know. You need to ask her. She made the reservation. And so then he acknowledged that I was a human being standing in front of him and said, what hotel?
Yeah.
And that's all he said. And I told him, and that was the end of it, right? So understanding that and knowing that, it makes me more sympathetic to, if I am working with someone who's Saudi Arabian or from the UAE or northern parts of Africa and even Central Africa, where there are high concentrations of Muslims. If I am in a leadership position, if I'm the boss, and that kind of goes two ways with that cultural difference. I already know coming out the gate, that man's not going to want to listen to me.
Yeah.
So that, that's one barrier, right? But then the other barrier is the women not standing up for themselves, not asserting themselves, maybe sitting in a meeting and not giving any ideas. Maybe not, because I'm the type of person where if I have an idea and if I feel like you value me, I'll bring you my idea. Whereas they may just sit there. I remember when we went to the desert, we did a desert tour on 4x4s while we were in Dubai. And afterwards, we went to the popular camp event where they do dinner in the desert and the camp, and there's a camel and all of that. And there is a woman who does, and it just slips my brain what it's called. Come on, brain. Henna. Thank you.
Oh, Yeah.
does, the henna tattoos. And it was temporary, but it came with the package. And so if you wanted the henna, you went back. And when I went, I got like something extra for $5 or whatever. And I could feel the repression from her.
Sheesh.
Yeah, like it just like she didn't talk to me. She didn't look at me while she was doing it. And I said, okay, so what comes with what's already paid for? And she was just like right here. I was like, okay, so if I want it up here, how much? She was like $5. I said, okay. She didn't make, in America, people are making idle chit chat. They talking like I go to get my when I go to get waxed, the waxers are always talking to me. I'm like, can I just get like my 15 to 30 minutes a piece? I just want to sit here with my eyes closed, rip the hair off my face, and let's see, in America, we're socialized to have idle chatter. The women there, even when you go to the mall, the men are with the men wearing the white caftans. The women wear all black, as though it's because we know that for whatever reason, societal culture has associated white with purity and good and black.
Yes.
But I'm like, MLK, I want to get the narrative right today. There's nothing wrong with being black. I am black and I am beautiful. In fact, black is my favorite color. But nevertheless, the women, they have to walk on like one side of the mall only with other women. And so you have to be cognizant that those differences really exist because they have to inform how you approach people and how you communicate with them. You also have to, a perfect example that I use, and I believe I use it in the book as well, is from a former employment situation that I had. There was a supervisor. She was the residential sales and service supervisor, and she was mid to late 40s, Black woman. And she would send me a message and I would ask her, or I would ask her a question. Her questions always came back her answers rather, always came back what I felt was very curt. I would ask a question. It was like, yes, no, let me check, see here. And like, it almost wigged me out one day. And I think if I had not been a doctoral student at the time and had not studied communication and emotional intelligence, and I'm really grateful for that part of my studies because it increased my emotional awareness and my emotional regulation, which thereby increased my emotional intelligence. And instead of going off like other people might have and ask her, why do you always give me these short answers? Is there a problem? I took into consideration her demographics. Mid to late 40s, Black woman. I think she never mentioned her father, always mentioned the mother. So she might have grown up in a single parent household. Being in that age group, you did not talk back. If you were asked, were the dishes clean? Yes or no. If it was yes, life was good. If it was no, you had some problems. And if the answer was no, I don't want it. No, your mother, your grandmother, no. There's no explanation why it's not done. Either you're running to do it or your life's about to be a little different, right? And that's all I'm gonna say. And so I had to realize that her curt or her short answers weren't a show of disrespect to me, and it wasn't her lack of communication ability. It was part of who she was. It was cultural relevance. And so I had to be culturally competent enough to understand this is why you communicate with me this way. Because mama's not letting you defend why the dishes aren't done. You might get to plead for your life, but you're not giving her an explanation. Oh, it's because I fell asleep and now today they do a little different, right? And you can do all of that explaining. When I was growing up, no, it was yes, no. You don't talk under your breath. It's a wrap, right? Conversely, my supervisor, who was a middle-aged to late 40s white male, always gave me more words than I needed. he would send me a message to ask me a question, and he would always start off. So yesterday I was reviewing the task, and I saw that you did 85 tasks. And the task number 43, I noticed that you left it open instead of closing it. Although it appears that you've done all the work necessary to close it, is there a reason why it's still open? I don't need those first 5 sentences. I just need, hey, on task number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, it looks like all the work is done. Is it a reason we left it open? That's all I need. I don't need all of the rest of that, right? But again, putting on my culturally competent hat, I realized that you a white guy who's mid to late 40s that came up in a 2-parent household with a sister. Y'all got to add all that extra stuff. Whereas I had this Black woman comparable in age to you. No, hold on. That's the fight. That's it. And so you have to learn how to have those competencies, whether it's talking to people who are the same nationality, the same race, different races, different religions, different, even, in Turkey. And I'll let you move on to the next question. Another example, I remember I had to do, when I was getting my master's in law, we had to do a write-up on a country that was different than ours and something about their customs. And in Turkey, again, large Muslim population, but they're very big on titles. And so titles that they hold in high regard are professors. So people like myself who have academic doctorates are held in higher regards than people who have medical doctorates. So using titles like professor, doctor, with an MD on it, carry more weight. And so if you're meeting with someone from Turkey who is a professor or something, the appropriate way to address them is Professor Donato as opposed to, hey, what's up, Donato, right?
Yes.
If you don't, they consider it disrespectful. And so it takes all of that to be an effective, dare I say, an extraordinary or an exemplary leader.
When you were going to come on today, there might have been some items that you definitely wanted to hit, some things that are about to happen. I'm going to package this today. It's going to get out today. So it'll hit the streets hot. Is there anything upcoming, any current projects that you wanted to tell us about?
I'm always doing things, but I'm going to, so since this is coming out before next week, I'm going to go ahead and plug something that's important to me that's not directly benefiting me. My chapter is raising money for our International Women of Color program, and I am facilitating and chairing that event. And it's a village in Samanye, I hope I pronounced that correctly, Ghana, to build a new toilet facility, medical building, expand the medical building, and a new school. So find me on LinkedIn, Dr. Khandicia Randolph, MA, MPA. There's a link on there. You can find me on Instagram. It's just Khandicia. On Facebook, it's Khandicia Randolph. We have met our goal, but as we all know, American dollars translate a lot bigger and more significantly impactful in other countries. So if I'm going to pub anything, I will definitely pub that. I will always tell people to order this. I understand that we are boycotting Amazon right now. I'm okay with us boycotting Amazon. I've not bought anything other than my phone case all year long. You can go to Barnes & Noble. They're online. You can also Google. There are eBay copies that were available. So if you Google this title, find it, order a copy, please. That is the biggest thing that you can do to help right now. The third biggest thing is if you need org development, like I say this all the time, right? When people ask me because they see my necklace, they say, oh, what are you a doctor of? And I say strategic leadership. And they're like, well, what does that mean? I'm a leadership and org development specialist. I help organizations figure out why they're not operating effectively and fix their problems. I help people become better leaders, identify their leadership styles. And people always say, oh my God, we need that here, right? Well, when I talk to the average member of an organization of a company, this lady told me that at Casey's gas station 2 weeks ago when she read my necklace, and I told her, she was like, oh my God, we need it here, right? So if you are watching this, if you are hearing this, I want you to go to your supervisor. If you are the supervisor, I want you to go to your boss. Guess what? If you're the CEO, CFO, AVP, associate VP, if you're the owner, I want you to contact me. You can reach me at Dr. Khandicia Randolph, so DrKhandicia@gmail.com. You can also visit my website, which is https://finerconsultingservice.com. It is the company website. Book a consultation with me. There is no need in today's world with people like myself who are walking around with all this information in their head for us to be operating ineffectively, inefficiently, to have poor communication skills, not to understand how to write mission statements, not understanding how our values tie into everything we do. I had an opportunity this week to teach one strategic planning class, and that was for Zeta. So that had an international audience. And then I had the opportunity to do one for the Black Women's Roundtable in Virginia. So if you need strategic planning help, everything from what is a strategic plan to the full drafting and implementation of it, please, by all means, give me a call, shoot me an email. I do have multinational $1 million corporation experience in this. Like, there's no reason that we should be out here on the struggle bus. And so that's my biggest ploy to people, right? There's always an opportunity for me to do this, that, or whatever. But my plea to you all today is donate to our International Women of Color. There are no fees. We're using Zephy, so shout out to Zephy to make it free for nonprofits. So There are no fees that you have to pay, but help us kick off our 20th anniversary celebration, which is a week from today. I'm a charter member of my chapter, and so the work that we do is very important to me. So aside from being a leadership expert, I always try to improve the condition of humankind. Order the book right now. Order one for you, your mama, your cousin, your best friend. I've had several people order them for their pastors. So make sure they read it if you order it for them, because it doesn't help to have it if you don't read it, right? And by all means, hit me up either on social media or on my website, and let's get to figuring out how to get people to operate more effectively and to be honest and open and authentic in our communications, right? Let's move this year in 2025. Let's shift to a facts, not feelings mindset.
Dr. Khandicia Randolph, I'm telling you that was a speedy hour. I know that there's more that I want to get, but that gives us an opportunity to have you back again. So in the comments, y'all let us know. And if you got some questions, write them so we can pass them off to Dr. Randolph. Dr. Randolph, again, thank you for talking with Donato.
Thank you for having me.
Have a great day.
You too.